Okay, here I am.
This meeting will come to order. Time is 6:32 on Monday, December 21st at 6:32, sorry. This is a special meeting of the Commission for Arts and Humanities.
We can
Its
start.
purpose is to hear the recommendations for the task force on equity and inclusion. I'm going to call the roll. Alma?
Well, wait a minute,
Yes.
that from?
Alma, I think I heard you say yes.
Yes.
Okay. Cece?
Yes, and my Cora as well.
Great. Cora? We see you there. Derek? Derek, are you here? Gretchen?
Here.
Jose?
Yes.
Kimber?
Here.
Mariah?
Here.
Marianne?
Here.
Natalie? Rona?
Here.
Casey?
Here.
Juanice? Hector? I know you're there. Maggie?
Hector, yes, I'm here.
Yes. Maggie?
Yes, here.
Carla?
I'm here.
Great. So glad you are. And Derek? I thought I saw Derek earlier.
I'm wondering if he got kicked out. I can help try and track him down.
Yeah, and he may be one of the people that are on the attendee list, and I can't tell which of these people. There's like 10 people.
Okay, well, we have everyone but that one person. So before we go further, I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hopes of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We stand on the ancestral lands of the Kachtank and the Piscataway people. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events and to use such truths to guide the legacy of this Arts Commission. Well, as I said, we're here to talk and discuss the proposals from the task force. And I want to basically turn the meeting over to Cora. We have been co-chairs of this task force, but it was her idea. And agreed that it was a good idea. So we were the co-chairs, but I think her vision and energy were the germ that brought this to bear. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Cora, if you have anything you want to say at the top.
Oh, can you hear me? I'm unmuted, right?
We can hear you.
Yes, now we
Then
can.
why are you doing this, Haran?
Because you were muted. When you started, you were muted. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you was trying to confuse me. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is a great day because it's the beginning of change. But before I go any further, Kay says that it was my idea, and it may have been, I inspired it because I was inspired by the moment and the time and the problems that I think this country is facing, and the commission is ready to move on. But it never would have happened had Kay not agreed to do it. So the credit goes to not just the one who inspired it, but the one who facilitated it. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Kay for being willing to do that, and to thank the commissioners that are on here for the first time with us, for being patient, as I said in my email, and supported. But more importantly, I also want to say that for me being a newcomer, I've been very pleased with how everybody's been open-minded and ready to go to another level. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Kay.
You're welcome, Cora, and that's very generous of you. I think we all know, everyone on the task force knows what a mutual effort has been. Not quite 9 months, not quite a baby, but just about. Reggie, you are our leader. I think you're next up.
Good. I'm not sure if I'm the leader, but I certainly am next up. So Patrick, if you would put up the slides, the background slides. I think it's important that the commission understands the context and background with which this work was done, as opposed to just launching into the recommendations. I will not take long, but I thought it was important to give this context. The next slide talks about the charter that we agreed to in our very first meetings, because it's important that we knew where we were trying to go and to test, do we reach that destination? So if you will indulge me, I just want a few minutes to actually read the charter in a purposeful way. The purpose of the DCCAH Task Force on Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging is to create a set of practices and behaviors and a culture of fair and equitable processes to ensure robust, varied, and fully accessible resources to the broad community. Substantively address any perceptions to the contrary, and boldly lead, setting an example for the region and industry, while, where necessary, improving and optimizing the ways we do business. And I must say that the recommendations that you will see later really centered on 3 sets of words in this charter. The first is practices and behaviors and a culture of fair and equitable processes. The second was fully accessible resources to the broad community. And the third was boldly lead, improving and optimizing the ways we do business. And we took great measures to ensure the recommendations addressed those aspects of the charter. And I think the task force is comfortable that we were successful with that. Next page, please. Here are the members of the task force. It is an inclusive group of staff, commissioners, and community members. And you'll note that at the bottom, we also recognize some outside people that helped us. Brian Dumont, who led the research in helping us create the questionnaires and surveys we sent out. And then Elaine Harris, who both helped with that, but most importantly, helped with the analysis and helped us really take the findings from the various groups we talked to and boil it down to things that we could drive specific, tangible recommendations from. So my thanks again, as Kay and Cora have said, but my thanks to the entire task force. This is work that was done over 6 months. We started in June. We met every Tuesday for 2+ hours, every Tuesday between June and December, with great dedication from everyone on the task force. And I think it's created a product that everyone should be proud of. So thank you to the task force members again. Last page. I talked about the inclusivity in the group and how we defined it. The recommendations were informed by primary research, where we went out and interviewed some people and we took surveys from others. And there was a benchmarking study that was done before so that we could understand on a benchmark basis, what are other institutions around the country doing to ensure that we were leading where we could. In June, the task force was formed. I said before, we had weekly meetings. In September, the survey research planning began. We broke into sub-teams to make sure that we were addressing the needs of the key stakeholders. The staff was one stakeholder, commissioners another, city council a third, grant applicants and grant recipients as well. We got surveys back from almost 900 participants, so we were comfortable that we had insightful findings from the group. There weren't a handful of findings. There were actually almost 900 people that participated. We did a benchmarking study, as I said before, to identify best practices from other arts commissions across the US. We then did a second survey in November to organizations that have gotten grants to ascertain their policies and practices around equity and inclusion. In November, we also did focus groups that included 20 or so people. And this was to both get input from the community and for some grantees who were not able to be reached by the survey. That produced the 40 plus recommendations that you will see today. And we are asking you to consider these recommendations today. We're not asking for a vote or answers or actions to be taken, but rather wanted to share the recommendations with you, give you time to think about them. And it's our understanding that as early as your January meeting, perhaps there will be a vote on that. But today is about presenting the recommendations. We'd like to take questions that you may have so that you understand what is there, so that when the time comes to vote, you understand what you're voting on. So thank you for allowing me to give you this background, and I think we can now proceed into the actual recommendations. David, did you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Reggie. So this first one, multilingualism, really speaks to the notion of us being fully accessible. In the past, or to date, we have provided language access. So we have provided interpreters to those who call in or who walk through our door, but we have not translated any of our materials into languages other than English. And so a first step in moving towards being fully accessible, we are going to initially make sure that there is a welcome and overviews of our programs in the 4 major languages other than English in the city, and they are Spanish, French, Amharic, and Chinese. Somebody mentioned that they had never been approached about the need for translation, but again, you know, there may be many people who looked at our website and who, you know, whose first language is not English, and maybe said, this is not a place for me. So I think by having a welcome and inviting them into our grants processes and our programmatic activities, that'll be a first step in getting a sense of the demand or the need for translating all of our materials into those 4 languages.
Thank you. Any question? And Kay and Cora, give me some guidance. Do we want to take questions now, or do we want to just go through them?
I think we should ask for questions after each one.
Good.
Yeah,
So any questions on this?
I agree with Kay because people forget.
Good. Any questions on this first recommendation?
This is Carla Sims. I had a question. Is there an option for Braille, or is it necessary? Have you found that?
That's a really great point, Carla. That didn't come up in the conversation. I know I used to be the language access coordinator, and I know that, and the ADA coordinator. A lot of folks use the JAWS system to translate, so particularly on a website. But it's definitely something we should look into as to whether there is a need. And again, that would speak to us being, you know, fully accessible to folks. Thanks for bringing that up.
No problem.
Any other questions? Thank you, David. Gretchen?
Diversity and equity representation in grantee organizations. Require diversity data in mid-year reports on organizations' boards, staff, constituents, to include questions on the next grant cycle applications. I'm happy to report that effective in...
I don't think that's going to revolutionize.
Cora, can you put your phone on mute, please?
I'm sorry.
I'm happy to report that with our general operating support grant that's going out in January, we will be introducing our diversity data requirement.
Good. Any questions on that? Thank you, Gretchen. Natalie and Khalid?
Khalid?
All right.
Me to start.
Okay. This is our clean hands requirement. And so we want to clarify that the current policy allows those on plans, on payment plans to apply. So we will work with individuals and organizations and make sure that if they're on a payment plan, we'll get sent something. We're going to look into that to allow them to go ahead and apply instead of making them ineligible before they can even start.
Good. Natalie, did you want to add anything?
Just really quickly, I mean, I think the clean hands, you know, you have to prove that you don't have any outstanding parking tickets over $100. This is a very regressive tax anyway. And for artists, it's very difficult who are schlepping things around town, and to have this be something that prevents you from getting access to grant isn't equitable. So we are glad to recommend, you know, continued flexibility with working with artists to, you know, on this clean hands issue.
Good. Any questions?
What else does the clean hands apply to?
In general, the clean hands applies when you are looking to apply for a grant for individuals and organizations. That is all I believe it applies to.
Does it have
question,
anything?
Khalid, doesn't it apply also to when you owe taxes to the district?
Okay.
I thought it did.
This is Carl Wilson. If you don't mind, just really quickly, generally speaking, the clean hands obligation it basically says that if you've got virtually any kind of outstanding financial obligation owed to the district, the Office of Tax and Revenue wants you to demand that you come and either clear up that obligation or make some arrangement to clear it up before it will give you its clean hand certificate. So in essence, to answer your question, Jose, it covers virtually every type of financial obligation to the district.
That's what I thought, and that's important. That's a little touchier when it comes to saying that we're not going to take that in account. We have to be in touch with the district finances and see what they want to work out. But it's bigger than parking tickets. Thank you.
Well, I think it is bigger than parking tickets because I am a grantee of the past and present. But in the lens, we're using the lens of equity. Organizational responsibility and obligations and individual should be separated out. And I think that we didn't go into it too deep, but we're looking into making an appeal and a difference in terms of who gets it, because people can work things out, but it shouldn't stop them from being able to create their art. And it's extremely punitive and difficult for individual artists as opposed to organizations such as mine. So I think it goes a little deeper than that. They didn't speak to that, but that was part of what we did discuss, is the difference between some of those obligations such as clean hands and what the difference it makes in terms of access and equity.
This is Cece. I just had a question. Do we have the option to opt out of this? Brian's shaking his head.
Well, that's something that we're continuously looking into right now in terms of what the premise of the clean hands. It is a policy that is citywide. Part of the reason that the clean hands certification has been put in place is to ensure that when a contractor or a vendor, or in this particular instance, a grantee receives any kind of award from the district, it is not subsequently taken as part of, or should I say, garnished in any way.
Garnished.
Right. So that's we want to make sure that any payments over $600 are not higher.
And CC and Brian, if I could just supplement what Brian added, and Brian, if I say anything that's incorrect, please don't hesitate to correct me. But it's my understanding that one, the clean hand obligations are codified in our laws. They're in the source book too, but they're also in the law, so we can't ignore it. But it's my understanding, Brian, that if the involved grant applicant has made arrangements with the Office of Tax and Revenue, that gives our agency the flexibility to then process grant awards. So we just have to figure a way, I believe, to adjust our policies to ensure that the involved applicant gets to OTR and makes an arrangement, and we can help them to the extent that they need help, and we can provide it.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's exactly what as it's been explained to us from the Office of Tax and Revenue. Whichever agency the outstanding debt is with, as long as the participant makes satisfactory arrangements, they are not excluded from any awards from the district.
Any other clarifications or questions? Thank you. Kay?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Kate. A note was sent around, but if you're not speaking, please mute your line because we're getting background feedback. So if you're not speaking, please mute your line. I'm sorry, Kate.
Sure. Mine is it's about a matching requirement adjustment. Right now, we are waiving the matching requirements. In the future, we want to waive the matching requirements for GOS grants for all organizations with budgets of $500,000 or below. The threshold prior to this recommendation was $250,000, and we want to change it to $500,000. Any questions?
Good. Thank you, Kay. Natalie? And if we could scroll down for the communications outreach.
Yeah, so especially when it came to the surveys and the focus groups, communication was an area of growth for the commission. People felt like they didn't know. It's sort of like a closed club that they didn't get access to, and they sort of weren't in the know. And so we talked a lot. This particular recommendation has a lot of details, a lot of different ideas on how to model equity while doing outreach. So, engaging local community groups, being really intentional about bringing in people who are not currently, grantees. And so there's like, I won't read all of them, but there's like a million ideas on how to do this and be really intentional about improving the communication and outreach for the commission.
Does anybody want to go through them in detail? Are there any questions? Any need for clarification?
This is Hector Torres. The question that I have is there going to be someone at the offices per se that is going to be in charge of doing this communications program, or how is this going to be handled? Because it's broad reaching, but I wouldn't understand.
Yes. Hi, Hector. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I think that Haran can probably answer this. My understanding is there will be a new communications head of communications that's coming on. So it's really good timing. And so that'll be part of what this new person does once they join the commission. But Haran, I don't know if there's anything else.
Sure. Thank you, Natalie. That's hi, Hector. Good evening. We have a communications department at the agency. Jeff is the chief of staff. That's the sort of the lead of the department. But we're also hiring a public relations specialist that would take on a lot of these tasks in conjunction with other departments and teams, in conjunction with the already existing team members at within the communications department.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you, Natalie and Haran. Jeff?
Okay, as y'all probably know, we've been in the process for the last several months of upgrading our website through Octo. So we have recommendations to make sure that this upgrade has interactive capabilities with incorporating social media, mobile applications, and listing resources in a very clear, attractive, and accessible presentation, which was one of the original impetuses for redesigning the website to make the information easier to navigate. And also, of course, this isn't being done by Octo, but a recommendation to look at the grants portal, which is a separate system, a separate software, at ways that it can either be recustomized through the operator to become more user-friendly, or if there's other programs out there that might serve the needs in a more accessible fashion.
Good questions?
Can you please tell us what MWBE stands for?
That's Minority Women Business Enterprises. So Minority and Women Business Enterprises.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Thanks, Jeff. Gretchen?
Financial updates for panels. Call applicants for updates on financials before panels. Add to the grant manager's responsibilities if deemed necessary, and review this process annually. Many times there may be several months between the actual application being submitted and received and the panel discussion. And many businesses change during that period of time. And we've gotten recommendations from panelists and from surveys that ask us to survey our applicants for the most recent update of financials.
Questions?
This is Cece. I have a question. One of the things I think that has been or seemingly onerous for the grantees was the need to do the cultural data arts project, or whatever that thing where you have to get some kind of certification for your finances and all of that. Are we eliminating, is that, I don't know if that's here or if that's going to be later, but are we going to try to eliminate that barrier to the, especially the smaller organizations who may not have the capacity to fill out such an extensive
Yeah, we already have eliminated that.
Right.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That no longer exists.
Yeah.
Great.
And again, sorry to be a pest, but someone is not muting their line. We can still hear other conversations. Please do mute your line. Thank you. Any other questions on the financial updates? Thanks, Gretchen. David?
Hello again. So we have always offered the opportunity for both successful and unsuccessful applicants to receive debriefings, but we have been rather passive about it. So we are making a commitment to reach out to all those, particularly those who are not funded moving forward, to ensure that they receive the panelists' comments and have the opportunity to meet with us. I've seen a lot of debriefings where folks have come in, particularly individual artists, where their art is so personal and they're so terribly disappointed. And there's a wonderful opportunity for us to turn that conversation around. So by the time they leave the room, they're actually feeling pretty good about themselves and their work, and armed with some ways of beefing up their applications and better telling their story. So we are making a commitment to being more proactive in doing that moving forward, so that every applicant has the opportunity to receive feedback and guidance moving forward.
Great. Any questions? Thank you. Brian?
Yes. Any music? Oops. Okay, thank you. The next one is community interaction. And so what we came up with is to come up with a more robust and method to interact with the community, answer questions relating to the grants, its grant writing, as well as provide information about the commission, its budget, and operations. And of course, this would be an all-inclusive effort, in which it includes the commissioners, the executive director, and staff. In addition to that, we like to be more present in the community. So one of the things that we looked at was CAH in the community, or CAH in the community, where we set up commission stations for staff and community interaction virtually now, but post-COVID, having different events that we would all attend, and just teach the community a little bit more about who we are and what we do, and how, and the funding that we have. And then in addition to that, one of the other things that we wanted to look at is to have a little bit more of a response from the public in terms of how they would like the funding. So we would like to develop a plan to conduct a survey of community needs and commission performance every 2 years.
Good. Questions? Rona?
Okay. Panel diversity and management. We're looking to enlist and actively seek new panelists that represent the community. And basically with picks and stations, we want the staff and community to interact through various venues throughout the city. We want to do better outreach. One example would be talking to churches. We want to choose a diverse group of panelists who best reflect the composition and demographics of our city and who are arts advocates. We want to keep a rubric of qualifications, and we want to set equity and inclusion targets. We want to ensure wards have adequate and equitable representation on panels with a focus on Black, Brown, and other historically excluded groups. We're also planning or hoping that we can submit legislation to the council for payment of panelists. That would be very important. For many panelists many people can't be panelists because they can't take off work. So this would be very, very helpful. And then the second part of panelist presentation is we need to spend more time with panelists before the actual panels begin, reinforce and standardize current training with a how-to video as part of the prep for panelists. So I've given you a brief overview. So are there any questions?
And scroll down a little because Rona covered the panelist preparation as well.
Yes.
So yes, any questions? Thank you, Rona. Natalie?
Hi again. So this was another, commissioner term limits was another idea that came out of a lot of the feedback from the surveys and the focus groups. You know, the idea with equity in general, we're looking to have as much turnover as possible and have as much, not as possible, but having a healthy amount of turnover so that there's always new ideas that are coming in. You know, again, going back to the idea of this being a kind of a closed club, if they're, you know, DC is a very big city and there's a lot of very talented, qualified people who could serve in this capacity. So the idea was by creating limits for commissioners, it might give more people opportunity to serve and be engaged.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you, Natalie. Kay?
To do with the chair of the commission and the decisions made for committee chairs and committee composition, and to make sure that the values of IDEA are always in mind for the chair. We wanted to insert that responsibility in the new bylaws so that it would say that the chair must keep in consideration the values of IDEA when choosing her committee chairs and assigning the memberships.
And Kay, perhaps you should just remind them what IDEA stands for.
Yes, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access.
So where others talk about diversity,
is that, people have the chance to feel that they have a voice and that it's a mixed, balanced group that comes together for each committee. Any questions on that?
I was going to say, while others talk about diversity and inclusion, and that's their descriptor, the commission and the task force have chosen this IDEA term, just so that people aren't confused about what that is. I'm sorry. So any questions? Thank you, Kay. You're on a roll.
Next one too. Okay.
Yes.
The idea was that there should be a retreat for team building amongst the commissioners and staff. And we all agreed that would be a good idea. Any questions about that? Okay.
Thank you, Kay. Khalid and David? Khalid and David?
So a lot of the discussion on the task force was in trying to establish a baseline, and Gretchen spoke to it earlier that we're going to begin asking our grantees to self-identify, so we have a better understanding of who we're serving. So when we came to this particular category of funding, artists who identify as artists with disabilities or BIPOC or LGBTQ artists. I'll speak for myself in saying that I felt that it was really, really important for us to have a baseline first before assuming that any of these artists would want to be pulled out and somehow possibly othered by creating a category specifically for them. But it is something that we do want to dig into this year as we better understand who it is we are serving. Part of that will be how do we understand how to better serve them. Khalid, I don't know if you have anything that you would like to add to that.
No, you pretty much summed that one up.
Okay.
I'll go to the next one. If there's any questions on that one. If not, I'll go to the next one, which is helping smaller organizations grow. So we're going to look at this as doing like a feasibility study of trying to, if there's a way to provide them more support or resources, looking at different formulas than the formulas we use at the commission now for most of our grant programs, finding a different formula that would help smaller organizations grow. And we consider small organizations 500,000 and less. And then we also are going to look at a feasibility where it's multi-year funding and providing a mechanism for grant writing support. Any questions?
Thank you. Monica? Is Monica with us?
Good evening. This recommendation is around geographic equity. The recommendation is to create equity throughout the wards by ensuring that geography is an important consideration in IDEA. Using the same selection criteria, consider adding at least 10 qualified new grantees from east of the river. Are there questions?
Thank you, Monica. Khalid, you and David again.
Go ahead, David, I'll let you.
Sure. So this is really a collective impact initiative, what we've been engaging in. And one of the pillars of collective impact is having a common vocabulary. And I think this is really, really important because, these terms are bandied around by everybody in the world, and oftentimes people don't have the same understanding. So we think it's really, really important that we, as the commission staff and commissioners, engage in training so that we better understand not only the terms, but the substance of the terms, so we in turn can help give guidance to our grantees, individuals, and organizations, and better fold those values and beliefs into the content of our grants and other programming.
So that's the training recommendation you're talking about? Okay. Did we
did I skip?
cover the,
Sorry.
Yeah, you skipped the second
Sorry
of
about
the
that.
expanding special grants.
And again, this was something that we really felt that we needed to have this baseline data. And so this is the year FY22, starting with the General Operating Support Grant that is launching in late January, that will begin to solicit that information as part of applications. So we really have a better sense of who it is we're serving. And then based on that, we'll start looking at where who it is we're not serving with our current portfolio of grants.
Good. So questions both on the 2 expanded special grant categories and the equity training. Any questions there? Thank you. Gretchen?
Equity and inclusion targets. Conduct a study to establish baseline data on how grants are currently distributed with the goal of reallocating funding to align with race and other demographics. Consider increasing the number of African American grantees by at least 10%. Use available tools and resources. Consider outside help for analysis and insight development as required. What we realized as part of the task force discussions is that we really had no baseline data. There were suggestions, there were opinions, but we had no hardcore data. So we are recommending, we're recommending that a study be established to that we conduct a study to establish the baseline data. Also, we want to implement a metric system for equity to be included in grant scoring by giving extra points, value, consideration to organizations that employ and execute equity, inclusion in various forms such as programs, events, staff, board, public communications, and other areas. We want it to be a top to bottom evaluation. Conduct a thorough review of outcomes after each metric system is added. Suggest implementing a ladder approach to measured outcomes. With all of the discussions that we've had over the last 6 months, we really felt this is one of the most important things we could do to establish some baselines.
Great. Any questions? Thank you. You're on a lens, Gretchen.
Okay. Ensure that the pool of CAH applicants for both individual grants and GOS, that's General Operating Support, institutional and project grants, shift by at least 5 to 10% each year to include arts organizations and individual artists who have not received city investments, especially Black, Brown, and other historically excluded groups. Require grant managers to be accountable to equity targets in the pool of applicants for each grant cycle. Revise language and criteria for grants to include an equity lens according to definitions developed by the Equity Task Force. Require biannual reports from the staff progress toward equity goals. Again, this is something that is critical to the entire IDEA approach. And this comes forth as a unified recommendation from the task force, obviously. It's not only important to talk about what we want to do, but in order to measure it, we have to set some goals. That's why you see the 5 to 10% each year. Without those targeted goals, then the lens and the focus is not as accurate as it should be. Analyze grants to define how an equity lens can be applied. define artistic merit, excellence, and publish on the website and in grant guidelines. Discuss with grant applicants and include in all grant guidelines. Use the task force recommendations where applicable for grant proposals. The analysis should have input from the staff and the commissioners. There should be quarterly reports given to the commissioners of the revision of grant guidelines and outcomes. We've had a number of these grants for many, many years. And with everything that's happening in the world and the country, we really need to take our hat, put a different lens on it. Make sure that the grants that we are actually giving to people are the ones that are required and the ones that are equitable.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you, Gretchen. Cora? Cora?
Oh, you call me?
Yes,
Oh, okay. Is it my turn?
it is your turn.
Is that the end? Are we talking what? I can't see.
Apply Equity Lens to Budget Support Act.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I'm sorry, Apply Equity Lens to Budget Support Act.
Okay. Well, the Support Act, the Budget Support Act, for those of you who are new to the commission, and maybe some of you who are not new but don't really understand it, is a bill that was passed last year. We call it CAH, but it's a bill that guarantees a group of people a certain amount of money. So our position is that each commissioner on the Arts and Humanities Commission has a moral and fiduciary obligation to be fair and impartial custodians of the public trust and to protect the public trust. The current preferential treatment that the National Capital Arts Cohort and Humanities DC receives violates our duty to the citizens and constituents we were appointed to serve and flies in the face of equity and fairness. The CAH is the classic example of how money, power, and influence can corrupt an already fragile system. The CAH is not an ordinary institution. This consortium consists of some of the most prominent organizations, art organizations in the city, who are predominantly white and have budgets over $1 million. They have unmatched resources, connections, and power. Last year, well-paid lobbyists and powerful entities acting on behalf of the CAH successfully lobbied and influenced our legislative body to set aside guaranteed funding without question or competition, which resulted in 28% of all our arts grants, representing $8 million in the FY20 budget. This stealth operation was done without the knowledge or the involvement of any present serving commissioner. Every commissioner who has stated unequivocally many times they knew nothing about this legislation until it was passed by the city council. Neither the council nor the CAH respected the commission or the commissioners enough to recognize his expertise or to solicit his input on such a hugely impactful action affecting the entire arts community. And with this substantial allocation of public dollars by the council came zero, I repeat, zero accountability of how the CAH uses the funds or the results achieved. This privilege is an unwise, unfair, and dangerous precedent. Through CAH, the message that we are allowing to go out to every hardworking artist and art organization devoted to the craft in this city is very clear. Some groups matter more than others. Some art forms are more important. And, excuse me, I lost my page here. And connections are what will ultimately determine the level of support you receive and what you can do with it. And the CAH is not only an affront to our responsibilities to level the playing field and expand access to grant opportunities in an equitable manner to all, but NACOC's earmarked allocations is a sham in terms of the values of diversity, inclusion, and belonging that we as commissioners hold as guiding principles. Some of the commissioners that are on this call and some of the ones who were on the task force, we looked into, this was an overall view of what NACOC represents and how it has impacted on us, but we are looking at giving more information so you have a better understanding of the direct impact it has on all the other grantees that apply and that are grantees of the commission. Gretchen, who is the chair of the grants committee, is the one, I would say, the first line of defense to see that, you know, the allocations that are given out to other grantees are affected by the $8 million that automatically goes to NACOC. I would appreciate it, Gretchen, if you would share with them some of the metrics you have come up with.
Thank you, Cora. Basically, the legislation has compromised our grant-making ability in the fair way that we know and feel that it should be done, both in FY20 and in FY21. In each of these years, we are mandated to give 28% of our grants budget to NACOC, as well as additionally allowing them to apply for the Facilities and Buildings grant, which is another 17% of our budget. This translates to a minimum of $8 million for FY20 and another $8 million for FY21. These amounts are taken off the top of our grants budget, period. There's no competition. We are just mandated to give this money to NACOC. It's not a mandate. This is a mandate for us, but it's not an award that's achieved competitively, I think, which is one of the things that we've discussed ad nauseum. In addition to CAH is also mandated to give 5% of our grants budget to Humanities DC. Again, this is a mandate. This is not something that is applied for, that is paneled, that is in any fair way chosen. No competitive process. We'd like to invite, at least, and I personally would like to invite NACOC and Humanities DC to sit down with us at the table and to work out a fair way of doing this so that the citizens of the District of Columbia are all treated fairly, no matter their income level, no matter where they're located.
Thank you,
Gretchen?
Yes.
Thank you. I had a question as a new commissioner. Are there examples from your experience where we may have had an organization go through a review panel on artistic merit, for example, that the panel that convened felt that the organization may or may not have risen to the level of artistic merit, but then received funding because of the mandatory funding allocations? Has that happened?
Absolutely. I can think of one or two instances in particular where an organization score paneled at the very bottom, which in any instance would not permit us to recommend funding. However, we are mandated to give that organization part of this 28% of our grants budget, even though their scoring was at the bottom.
And there's no remedy that the commission has in that instance. Is that correct?
Well, because the staff and the commissioners work closely together with whatever we're given to deal with here, we made up our own remedy. And I want to thank David and the grants team for this. We actually made it so that we could award everybody else some of the money. We felt in our own hearts there was no way that somebody who was at the bottom of the list should be getting money while those at the top get so much less.
Gretchen, can I step in? And Cora, we've gotten a little off script. There's a recommendation on the table to look into this and to come up with a plan and to present it. I feel like we're doing that. We're doing the homework right now at the public meeting. The recommendation to look into this is on the table.
Well, yes, and that's why I want to say publicly that I would like to invite, as a commissioner and with the grants team, I'd like to invite the parties that we're talking about to sit down at the table and let's work this
Well,
out.
to be fair, they have asked several times if we would like for them to come to a meeting and present their side. And we haven't had a meeting that's had room on the agenda or been appropriate for them to come, but they aren't resisting that.
Okay, well, that's really good to know, Kate. And we're definitely going to follow up on that. But right now, we're not only making presentations of the recommendations as in other of the recommendations, we're also giving a contextual breakdown, and in some instances, in this instance in particular, we're giving them a little understanding and a definition. And so I think that in order for people to actually understand what we're talking about, other than the generalities, I think they need to know more about the impact and how this really works out. It's a very mysterious thing from the outside.
Yeah, but this is the recommendation to the commissioners.
I'm not finished. Thank you. I'm not
finished.
finished.
This meeting is a commission meeting.
I'm not finished, Kay. I'm not
well,
finished.
I can barely hear you, Cora. I can barely hear you.
I'm sorry. Let me speak up. Can you hear me better now? Thank you.
Barely.
And so what else I was saying also was that it's not just the existence of NACOC, but how they set it up. It's a group of people who have a lot of power, have a lot of money, and they utilize several groups of people of color and minorities to justify what is their existence in a very unequal way. And I want to particularly ask Maggie, can she share how she feels about that as one of those groups that was represented?
Well, that's fine, but I think all the commissioners, I've talked to nearly all of them, I think they all understand that there's something to proactively adjust here. Nobody did know about this. People do have a lot of emotions about it. I personally am surprised we're going into this right now. It doesn't seem the time or place.
Thank you. Can you let the process follow itself out? You've made your objection known. I appreciate that. I respect that. Maggie, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, well, a couple of things I would just say that as a member of the task force, one of the things that we identified as part of the task force work was kind of a groundswell of support for a more inclusive and participatory and also I would say transparent funding process that both improves the accessibility and dismantles some of the built-in process that has historically been favored, I would say, an entrenched perspective of white privilege. So I think we all agree on that, Cora. We all agree that we need to advance more transparency. I would also just say, that I would try as best I could, and I would recommend that we try to avoid tokenism as we look at funding for arts organizations. What we uncovered as part of the task force is it's not enough to just give grants to a group from a certain community, but rather we need to make sure that we are being authentically inclusive, and we're not saying that we've solved a problem simply because we give a grant to a certain community group, a group from the African American community, a group from the gay community, for example. We need to make sure that we're dismantling some of the institutional bias. And what is that institutional bias? The institutional bias is this. On the panels that are convened for selecting organizations, what we found as a task force is they are not fully represented by people of color. People of color don't participate in those panels, where we might seek to remedy and have a more inclusive evaluation of arts funding. Another is there isn't a clear understanding of how certain groups are selected as part of funding mechanisms, and we need to make sure that in those instances, we are clear about how groups are funded, why they're funded. Is it from an economic need perspective? Is it an artistic merit perspective? And then last, one of the things that I think we uncovered as a task force is that when we select groups for funding, we make sure that they are reflecting our values that are held across the district. For example, do they have diverse boards? Do they have diverse employment, et cetera, et cetera? And then the other thing we talked about was, if we're giving money to organizations in the District of Columbia, can we ask them to give back to the community? For example, could we ask them to set aside certain FTE or headcount and make sure that we're allotting that to the Marion Barry Jobs Program in the summer, so that we're giving kids the opportunity to be part of internships if certain large organizations are provided funding? Those are things that we could easily do to make sure that we're, quote, building a pipeline and making sure that we're being more inclusive. So let's address the institutional issues that we have, not just have token representation within a funding stream. I should also acknowledge, Cora and Madam Chair, that I am on the board of a couple of organizations that receive funding in the district. And as part of my transparency and governance responsibility, it's important that I acknowledge that I am on 2 of those boards that receive funding. So in the spirit of transparency, I want to make sure that people are clear on that.
Thank you, Maggie. And also the other part of this is beyond the unfairness of it and the inequity of it and the immorality of it. There's a legal issue, and it's a non-compete issue that the District of Columbia Council is taking up right now because they're in some muddy waters in terms of the legality of this. Monica, you want to talk a little bit about the non-compete?
Sure. On its face, the CAH awards appear to be a sole source award. And although there's DC code that allows for sole source, there's language that's very specific as to when that tool should be utilized. For instance, a contract should only be awarded through a non-compete when there's only one source that can provide the good or service. The CPO actually makes that determination and justifies that sole source procurement. They're also called no bid contracts. Although a sole source implies that there's only one person or one company that can provide that service. And that if you attempted to bid it out, that you'd only get one response to an RFP. On its face, the CAH coalition does not meet either of those standards. Although there are some benefits to sole source, speed in contracting, less administrative support, there are some significant cons with sole sourcing. One, if there's only one source, the agency has very little ability to maintain the competitive environment. And 2, non-CAH organizations are irreparably harmed by reducing total funds available across the city. It also suppresses the interests of other organizations who may want to compete, but the total is reduced by this process.
Thank you very much. And then finally, at the end of the day, I appreciate that. At the end of the day, the lens of equity is the one that shines the brightest on this situation. In an overview, I spoke to that. But Cornice, do you want to wrap this up and then talk about just how that impacts? Thank you also, Monica, because I know that Gretchen mentioned it, but I think it's important that you went right in and acknowledged the fact that other people suffer and cannot compete adequately and get what they deserve because we have $8 million going to a non-compete. Cornice, you want to wrap that up with the equity lens on this, please?
Yeah, and so when we think about equity, we think about the strategy for us to get to the final outcome of equality, right? And so when we have a list of organizations who are taking up a bulk amount of means from the rest of the smaller institutions, then that becomes an issue, right? It plays out in a way where we're not reaching our overall outcome of equality through the equity lens. And so when we think about how we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we're having these conversations. And so if everybody who was on the commission remembers, I sent an email back when the CAH actually sent us all an email, and I sent them an email back in May, and I asked them what are they doing for folks on the ground, and they were not able to tell me, and they weren't able to tell us. And so I think this is important because when I was going through my reappointment with Mendelsohn, he brought it up that he thought this was a good idea, but maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that our overall goal is equality through the lens of equity and ensuring that everyone has a fair, just opportunity to receive the amount of funds in a competitive manner.
Thank you. And in conclusion, I will say that every commissioner that I have spoken to on this topic has said repeatedly they had no knowledge. No one talked to them about it. They didn't know anything about it until the bill was passed. That in and of itself speaks to the fact that us as a commission needs to have something to say about it in a united voice. I understand that the commission hasn't spoken publicly about it up to this point. They haven't written anything about it, and they have not, as an organization, actually lobbied against it, except in very small cases in which it was not successful. So if we are truly worried and think that this is wrong, if we truly think that this has no place with the commission, if we truly think that it's unfair to all the other grantees, and if we truly think it's a misappropriation and a misuse of of our taxpayers' money, then it is time for the commission to do something about it as a collective body and speak up and stop the behind the door situation. And the CAH can meet with us, and I would love to meet with them personally, but on its face, equity or no equity within their organization, the structure is wrong. The structure, when you have a group of powerful people with resources able to get money that they don't compete for and do not have accountability for, that's wrong. And there's no getting around it. And you can say what you want to say about what they contribute, but that does not make them better than anybody else. It just makes them another competitor. And I think we should speak with them. We should talk about how we can make things more comfortable for them as an organization. But the decision of what they get and when they get it should come from the commission and not from a bill that ties us up. Thank you very much.
Other questions, clarifications?
This is Barry. I'd like to add one final note, which is, the research that we have done shows that there's been significant value, economic value, the arts organizations drive across the city. Some have estimated that to be $10 billion in economic value. 53,000 or more have been employed in the sector, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. Hopefully it's coming to an end, but organizations large and small have been gravely impacted. There have been many people that I know have been furloughed, that are out of work as a result of this pandemic, that come from the arts sector. So anything we can do as a commission, as a body, to help advocate for assistance to those individual artists and those that are working behind the scenes, that turn the lights on and off at art houses, that clean those houses, whatever those may be, they're in need of help. And so we have an opportunity, and I would say a responsibility, to give voice to those people who were hurting during this pandemic. And we as a body should do all we can to help address what is urgent need. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
And Reggie, this is Carl. Could I jump in and just add a quick additional note? First, I want to say I want to associate myself with all of the comments that Cora and Monica and Quanice made about the nature of these programs. And I'll just leave it at that and say that I am committed to helping do everything you all on a policy basis decide to do. But what I wanted to throw out there for you all to think about is this: we who feel this way, we need to not in the body of this meeting, but separately, we need to strategize about this, because Monica made the information that Monica gave is absolutely right, but there's a third exception to the district's general rules, the law that regards sole source grant making. And that third exception is earmarks that are created by the council in enacted legislation. And that's what this is. The council created this earmark, and they have a legal right to do so. So again, I share internally the same concerns you do. The way we need to come at this, though, is we're going to have to convince the folks at the council that the equities that favor the district residents, the district's local arts communities, should outweigh any equities that are discussed by these lobbying groups and these professional lobbyists. In other words, you commissioners are going to have to convince the council to change this law. And you're going to, and the reason I say that is that, think about a couple of months ago, at the Equity Task Force instruction, I drafted for the task force a piece of legislation that would have done every one of the things you all said you want to do to change the nature of our relationship in the CAH, to change the relationship of the nature of our relationship with Humanities DC. And the third part of that piece of that bill that I drafted at you all's instruction was a provision that gave us the authority to do these emergency grant awards that could be used to pay rent and mortgage obligations. Did that legislation, submitted it to the council. I know they got it because I submitted it and I got the receipt, the electronic receipt. A couple of weeks after we submitted it, we looked on the council's LIMS site and saw that they passed a version of our bill that was stripped down like a car left on 4 cinder blocks. And the only thing that was left in that bill was that one little provision that empowered us to make those emergency rent and mortgage grants. It only lasts until another month and a half from now. So I say all this to say, those of us those of you who want to effect this change, and those of us who want to help you do it, let's strategize separate and apart from this meeting, but understand we got to come at this by convincing the council because they have the legal right to create the earmarks that they created. So let's do this smart, and I'll do everything I can to help you.
Thank you, Carl. Let me just say for the purpose. Let me just say for a quick second. I agree with what you said, but here's the problem: the commission has not stood up with a voice and said we object to this. The commission has not, as an organization, made a position or stated a position or written anything about it. None of it has not happened. And so, at the end of the day, it has to be a position that the commission takes. Now, since that time, I have spoken, and some of the rest of many people on this call have spoken to other commissioners who are ready. I'm sorry, not commissioners, but council members who understand more than they understood before this legislation went through and they weren't paying attention. But I still say, no matter how much lobbying we do as individuals, where is the commission's objection? A commission that has said, I didn't know anything about it. A commission from the top to the bottom, every commissioner on this call that has been here said, I don't know anything about it. I object to it. I think it's horrible. They've said it over and over again. So where's the courage in raising your voices? That will make a big impact. Yes, we will strategize, but we need to strategize with one voice and a vocal voice.
So I have a quick question for Carl. So you said that the exception was the earmarks. Is a whole agency budget is an earmark? I mean, I don't understand that.
No, that's not what I said. I said that the provisions that were newly created to change our relationship to Humanities DC, in essence, creating this brand new Humanities DC 5% of our budget grant program, and the part of the BSA that was created and that created the NACOC cohort and all of these laws that mandated that we give a certain percentage of our budget to NACOC. Those two provisions were created in the BSA, and so the provisions in the BSA that said specifically CAH, you are to annually give this percentage of your budget to Humanities DC. That's an earmark. That's an earmark, and it's not just my opinion that it's an earmark, because when similar legislation was considered, I think it was in the BSA before that, there was the council. We were watching in our office, hoping that everything came out, and we watched as Council Member Mary Che and at the time it was Jack Evans. Went back and forth with Council Member Anita Bonds, and there was one other, because two of the council members raised the issue. This is an earmark, and the chairman, and I believe it was well, I won't call say who because I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember who the second person was, but two of the council members pointed out to everybody watching, including their colleagues, that the council's rules say that as a general rule, the council will not pass earmarks, but the chairman reminded everybody it's just a rule and they could waive it, and they did. So I'm not saying our whole budget.
Carl, listen, everybody, I want to come back to the point that there are negotiations being planned. This is something that's important. We have here a recommendation to deal with it. That's what's on the table. I feel like we're going off on a tangent, trying to deal with it right now as though we were at a small committee working together to say what are our next steps. I don't know that this is appropriate for public conversation. We've heard from everybody. We know that.
I think transparency is important, Kay. And all this working behind closed doors, that's the problem. We need, as a commission, to speak up and stop working behind closed doors on a topic that affects everybody in the city, especially grantees who are not getting the amount of money they could get because you have privileged, powerful, white, rich organizations taking 28% of our budget. That's not a backdoor negotiation, Kay. That is an organization of commissioners who say, we don't like this. And then we will all be a part of and be understanding of and be cued in on what the negotiations are, because we should be able to contribute to it. This
Cora, what is your plan for the rest of this meeting?
Too much. Stop it. All that.
What is your plan for the rest of this meeting? We have a suggestion on the.
I'm finished.
Okay.
Other questions? We can move on to the last recommendation, Kay.
Yes, the last recommendation is about creating a committee, an idea standing committee for the commission. That would be one that oversees the notions of idea, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access, to make sure that we're applying that lens to ourselves and to our grant making. So we want to execute this by putting that standing committee into our bylaws.
Questions, clarifications on that recommendation? So this is a lot to digest in a short period of time. I appreciate that. There are over 40 recommendations that have been submitted here. Again, tonight's presentation was to share the recommendations, to solicit questions, to clarify points so that when the commission goes off to take a vote, you know exactly what you're voting on. There's no issue before you. I think that we could make ourselves available again if some questions come up in your sleep or over the holidays. But I again applaud and thank the task force for their diligence in sitting through 6 months of these meetings and creating, in my 32 years as a consultant, an amazing piece of work, what I see here. And my certain hope is that the commission will adopt all of these recommendations and move ahead. This clearly will put CAH in a leadership position relative to this topic and will deliver what I know their goal and their charter was from the beginning.
I have a quick question, maybe not so quick. I just have a sort of a general question. I was waiting till the end because it kind of applies to the whole recommendation. So I see there are a lot of really great ideas in the recommendations, but I think recommendations are only as strong or as effective as the ability for them to be executed. And it looks like there is a tremendous amount of work that's going to be put on the staff, especially the grant staff. And maybe this is a question for Haran and David, but just what is the staff capacity to do all this? Because as we know, they do a tremendous amount already. And is there, I know we currently don't have a grants director. Is that something that is going to be addressed as well? And that's just my biggest concern right now. I think we could all vote on something and it would be great, but if we don't have the capacity to actually execute it, then I just worry that, that's my biggest worry.
Thanks, Cece. We will need to take time, just as the commission is taking time to look at these recommendations and figure out what the short, medium, and long-term planning might look like. It's going to take conversations with the teams involved, because as you know, there's also a whole other side to the work that the agency does. So it's not an easy question to answer right on the spot right now, but we'll take some time to look through everything and propose a way forward that'll make it operational, make the recommendations operational.
Thank you.
Can I ask, I assume we're going to get a copy of all these recommendations, and will we have the opportunity as we go through them before we vote, if it's next month, to speak to someone to ask some questions for clarification? And who would that
Yeah, I was
be?
going to say, so the document that we went through today has been sent to you already. It can be sent again if you wish. And as I said, I'm certain we will make ourselves available for questions you may have once you've had a chance to look at them more carefully and think about it. But in the invitation to this meeting, at some point, Jeff, it's my understanding you did send this full document to everyone.
Yes.
Correct. And the updated one.
Well,
this
how do
morning.
we reach you? How do we reach some of the people on the who are not commissioners who are on this?
I think you can direct it through Kay and Cora as co-chairs and as commissioners as well, and they can direct you to the people who can best answer your questions.
Okay.
Reggie, may I make
Brian?
a statement before you close out?
Yeah, I wasn't closing out, but go on.
I think that everyone on this call, if I can just say this, it took us 6 months to come up with these recommendations and present it to this commission, this body, because it was not an easy conversation. It was not always just everybody get along and go along with what the recommendations were. It was a lot of give and take and a lot of consideration from everyone's aspect, including the constituents. So I think that a lot of the recommendations put forth, we have a fairly good reason to feel very confident and upbeat that we can achieve them. And secondly, I can honestly say that we could not have presented these ideas or these outcomes without the spirited leadership of Reggie and the countless hours of work and the presentations that Elaine has provided us. The tools that they've given us has really prepared us to present this final product to you all. So it should not go unnoticed. It should not even be unrecognized. It should be something that's extremely commended to Reggie for his time. I don't know what the compensation is for you, Reggie, but I guess it is a blessing and to have worked with you on this task force. And that is why I asked if this would be in terms of what's next for you. I know you have a very busy life, but again, I thank you for your time, your professionalism, and your guidance.
Thank you. I mean, the payment to me is the joy of hearing what you just said. So I came to be helpful to this group, and if I did that, then I've done my work. I thank you. And Elaine, of course, I could not have done this, as you said, without all the tremendous work that she did at a level of detail that my eyes are rolling and crossing and I'm passing out. But I must say that, and she won't want me to tell you this, but for the night before we sent these final recommendations to the task force for your review, Elaine and I worked on them from 7 p.m. until midnight on the phone working through this. So with all the hours that went into that, it still was a big hump to get over and get them done. But I'm hoping that you see in the quality of the recommendations that time was well spent. Any other questions or clarifications? So I was going to actually turn it over to Kay and Cora as the co-chairs to close us out.
Well, I just appreciate the time, and I hope and encourage everyone to read these carefully. You may not have had questions tonight because maybe you didn't really see them ahead of time, but do look at them carefully. As we said, it seems not possible that we could get through them so quickly when it took us 6 months to put them together and hone them into a focused recommendation list. So we feel really proud of these things. We do think they're doable. Maybe some will take longer than others. Some can be done within 3 months. So think about it. And I certainly, I mean, I don't know that this is the moment. You can't do it too often, but to thank Elaine and Reggie for all their work is something we could do over and over again, because they did put in the time and we really do appreciate it. Cora, do you have anything else you want to say before we adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, again, I want to associate myself with the remarks, but I wrote a email to a very small, short email to the commission about the larger lens of equity that has been a part of the problem, the original sin of the United States of America. And that sin permeates every aspect of the life. If you are Black and living in America, I don't care where you are, I don't care what you do, I don't care how hard you go in this country or how effective you are, you're going to be affected by racism and privilege. There are many organizations out there right now, as we speak, doing what we're doing. They're doing equity programs. They're changing the way they see things. I mean, you hear about it every day, and it's a long time coming, and it's welcome. And what we're doing is not a secret. Everyone knows we have a task force on equity. Everyone knows we're trying to change the culture and change how we deal with the public and be more equitable and be more fair. And so I'm proud of that for us. But know that eyes are watching us, that none of this is in secret. Everybody that needs to know knows, and more people will know. But what will be our great victory is when we start actually, and I'll stop for a second and thank Gretchen for her being proactive and some of the things she's already started doing. But when we start really doing things where people can see, feel, where I can hear somebody in the community says, you know, I called up there to that commission and everybody responded and I was able to get help with my grant and I got for the first time, you know, and then the other grantees, here's what you look like. Success looks like when people in the community are seeing the difference. That's success. When people say they got a grant for the first time, or people say they got more money than they ever got. And I don't know if we mentioned one of the recommendations was giving 80% of the ask from certain organizations as opposed to 20%. When we start doing that, we have succeeded. But thanks everybody, and especially, I know you thought I was going to say you, didn't you, Reggie? Especially Reggie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And with
Annie Lane.
With that, have a happy Christmas, and the meeting is adjourned.
Shout out to the staff. Y'all did extra hours. The staff put in more than their 50 hours of work.
Now, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow night. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow night. My Tuesdays, what am I going to do with those 2 hours every Tuesday? Oh my God.
I don't know.
I call you all anyway.
Yeah.
I'll call you. You're like, why are you calling me, Reggie? No, thanks everybody. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye.
Happy holidays.